Good evening.
Good evening, Rabbi. How are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank you. The last time we did Chet, I think we have to do Yud. Here it is. Right, so this is the famous machloket here. Important to know about this one. It says like this. Katav Bahag. Says the Bahag, the Kabbalat Shabbat teluya bedakat ner. That accepting Shabbat depends on lighting the candle. Katavan sheidlik ner shel Shabbat. So once he lit the Shabbat candle, halalav Shabbat, he accepts Shabbat. מפני זה כתב שצריך להקדים נר של חנוכה. This is the reason why he said that you should precede the Hanukkah candle של Shabbat to Shabbat. שאם יקדים של Shabbat, because if you do Shabbat first, לא יוכל להדליק את חנוכה. You're not able to light the Hanukkah anymore. Too late. ואחר כך, והתוספות כתבו שאין תלוי בדלקת הנר. But Tosfot disagrees with this. It doesn't depend on lighting the candle. Even after he lit, Shabbat he doesn't take on Shabbat. Rather, it depends on Tfilat Arbit, the Arbit prayer. Because if a person prays Arbit, then really Shabbat, he takes on Shabbat. Okay, that's the end of the tour. So let's go to Bet Yosef and see. Says Bet Yosef regarding this, Ve'aran beresh pek b'mim madlikin. So the Ran, the Tabet Divya Bahag, he bought the Bahag, Kuchuvot Ramban, also Ramban, Tosfot alav, Tosfot alav. Right, and whatever the Ramban and Tosfot answered on this. The who uzal the Tan Be'ad Bahag. Ishvan, right, the Tan Be'ad Bahag. So he reconciled them, and basically, right, he wanted to go like the Bahag. The Ran, okay. So you see, right, that we have a machloket on both sides. וכן נראה מדברי הרב מרדכי, that's what it says from מרדכי, שהוא מסכים לדברי הבהג, he also agrees with the בהג. אבל הראש כתב בסוף פרק במה מדליקין, but the Rosh says, the משמע בגמרא שקבלת שבת אינה תלויה בדלקת נר. He says that implies in the Gemara that taking on Shabbat does not depend on lighting the candle. ונראה שהיא תלויה בתפילת הערבית, so he says it really depends on praying ערבית. מדקאמר בתפילת השחר, like it says in this parak in the Gemara, וכן עמד עבר, so that's the custom, he says. כשהחזן אומר, ברכו, הכל פרושים ממלאכה. So once the Chazan says Baruch Hu, everybody ceases from doing labor. So you can see, right, that the Ashkenazim go like the first opinion. They do take on Shabbat when they light, and we Sfaradim go like the second opinion that we don't take on. וכן כתב רבנו ירוחם, that's what it says in this rabbi also, בחלק ב' שדברי אומרים הדלקת הנר שבת לא יביא קבלה עיקר. וכן, so he says, right, he agrees with the second opinion, that we don't take on Shabbat by lighting candles. הנה מדברי הרב מגיד בסוף מלאכות החנוכה שכתב על דברי הבהג, seems that Rav Magid wrote the name of the Rahag, וכבר השיבו עליו הרמב"ן ורשב"א, that these rabbis already argued with him. And the Bahag ve'amur she'en adlakat haner kabbalah said, right, so he says that lighting the candles does not forbid labor. They brought a source for this. ולא מצאתי בדברי רבנו קבלה עושית בערב שבת. So that we never found, right, in the words of Rabbeinu, what does that mean, the Rambam, that taking on Shabbat forbids וכן דעת הסמ"ג, this is what it says in הסמ"ג, מצוות עשה למד, וכן נראה שהוא דעת הגאות בסוף פרק ה'. The Hagot also says like this, אלא שכתוב בסמ"ג, אומנם המדליק עצמו אסור למלאכה. But it says, right, that it's written in the Samag that the one who does light himself, the one who lights himself, herself, whatever, like the candles, he is forbidden to do labor. After he lights, he brought source from Tosefta regarding this. Of Sukkah. But it says, right, that Rabbi Meir was accustomed so what he said was like this, right? If you don't want to take on Shabbat, make a condition that you're not going to take it on when you light. Shabbat. Until he removes from his hand the candle that he lit with it, or at tefilat arbit, or until arbit prayer. Otherwise, he's going to be carrying it in a forbidden manner. After he lit Shabbat candle. I think that's how Mordechai packed Bemed B'melikim. That's what it says in Mordechai. So it implies from his language, Shia can b'dato, that he also holds this way. Sagi afa pi shelo itna bepe, even though he didn't specify, right, didn't condition verbally. When you midvarav, seems from his words that even according to Bahag, he says shara behachi, in this manner it's allowed. Behachi ve'akolbo katab sharif. So it says the kolbo, the rif, and the rash, and the tashbetz katan, sharif. Apparently it's not the rif, it's the raf. Okay, whatever. There's the rif and there's the raf. I think the raf, he means Rabbeinu Peretz. But anyway, he argues on the Ram, ואומר דווקא לבני הבית, he says it only applies to the family members, אבל אישה שמדלקת היא אסורה לעשות מלאכה. But the woman who actually herself lit the candle is forbidden to do labor. לאחר שהיא הדליקה, after she lit, כיוון שמברכת עליה, once she blessed on it, אין לך קבלה גדולה מזו, you don't have any acceptance more than this. ואין מועיל לה שום תנאי. And then, right, no condition will help her. Wow. וזה לשונו שיבול ללקט. This language is שיבול ללקט. יש אנשים שמדליקים הנר בתפילה. He says some people, they light the candle in the prayer, ואחר כך שברכו, and after they blessed, והדליקו הנר, and lit the candle, משליכין הפתילה, and they throw away the wick, לארץ, to the ground, right? וגם בהג אוסר, also the Bahag forbids להדליק נר חנוכה, to light the Hanukkah candle אחר שבת, after Shabbat, the Shabbat candle. ותאמר לרב בנימין, so he says, it's a wonder on this rabbi, שאם תאמר שהברכה חשובה קבלת שבת, if you're going to tell me the blessing is taking on Shabbat, אם כן יהיה אסור להדליק, should be then forbidden to light the candle as well, that you blessed on. עד כאן, ונראה שאפשר לומר שדעתם בהדלקת הנר היא קבלה. Could be that according to their opinion, it says that when you light the candle, right, that's your acceptance. So כדברי הבהג בהג, וכן לראות שמדליק. Also with the candles that he lights, לכבוד שבת, honor שבת, כאחד חשיבה, it's considered to be like one thing. ושארו, therefore it's allowed, מה שאין כן בביאת הפתילה, not so when it comes to putting out the wick, שהדליקו בה, that they lit with that wick. והוא, דעניית ברך הוא הווה. So it says, that which we say, right, that answering baruch hu is like קבלת שבת, you're answering, taking on Shabbat. כתבו רבינו ירוחם בחלק א', והגאות בסוף פרק ה', all these rabbis wrote, the second these rabbis, ואמור לכי סוף פרק במד מדליקים, so this rabbi, ומה שכתב הראש, that which Rosh said, קבלת שבת תלויה בתפילת ערבית, and taking on Shabbat really depends on Arbit, not really on the candles. צריך לפרש דהיינו תחילת ותפילת ערבית. So let's talk about the beginning of Arbit, שהוא baruch hu, which is the baruch hu. ומסיים בסוף דבריו, like he concludes in the end of his words. וכן יש לפרש מה שכתב, it's also, it says the way you explain that which he wrote, תפילת ערבית, right, regarding תפילת ערבית. Okay. Again. Okay, so again, right, וכן יש לפרש מה שכתב רבינו, so that's the way we explain also what the Torah said, שהקבלה תלויה בתפילת ערבית. The Kabbalah, right, taking on Shabbat, it depends on Arbit. So what does that mean, Arbit? Baruch hu, right, which is the beginning of Arbit. Okay, great, that's a bit Yosef. Let's see Shulchan Aruch. So this is one of the fundamental halachot of Shabbat, regarding taking on Shabbat, when you light the candles. Yeah. So says Shulchan Aruch like this. So he says, Lebahag, כיוון שהדליק נר של Shabbat, once he, according to Bahag, once he lit the Shabbat candle, Shabbat, he takes on Shabbat, right, by that. Therefore, he's forbidden to do labor. So that's why some women, custom is by them, after they have already, right, blessed and lit the candles, משליכות לארץ, they throw it to the ground, right, the wick, פתילה, שבידן, they lit with that wick. So what does that mean? Because they're already in Shabbat, so according to this, they can't really carry that wick anymore since, there's a fire there. So they can't extinguish it either. So they just throw it on the ground and let it go out by itself. And they don't put it out, right? Because they cannot put it out. Sorry, Shabbat for them. Some say, right, that if you condition, you're not taking on Shabbat, right? Until Chazan says Baruch Hu Moil, this will work, right? So this is what the Ashkenazim do. What they do is, if they don't want to take on Shabbat, they make a condition, before they light. Some say it doesn't work. Some argue on the Bahag. They say, right, that has nothing to do with lighting the candle, taking on Shabbat. Only when it comes to only when you're praying Arvit, we take it on. So once the Chazan says Baruch Hu, everybody, right, desists from doing labor. So he says, right, by us, the custom is we take on Shabbat when we do Mizmor Shir Yom Shabbat, right, which is one of the Kabbalat Shabbat that we do in the shul. So once you said that, right, you're already in Shabbat according to our custom. So what about the ladies who don't go to shul? And so what, basically there's two choices, right? One is that, when Shkia comes, right, that's Shabbat, right? So, Shkia, sunset. Or the other thing is that it could be, since the community already took on Shabbat, so she gets dragged in with them, if that's the case. That's, it's one or the other. So, yeah, we're going to have to elaborate on that, later on regarding the issue of getting dragged in, with the community into Shabbat. But anyway, so as we said, right, we do like the second opinion, which says that you don't take on Shabbat when you light the candles. My humble opinion, it's just more logical, this opinion. And the reason is because when you light Shabbat candles, your focus there is not on taking on Shabbat. Your focus there is doing the mitzvah of lighting the candles. So the truth is, one has really nothing to do with the other. Just because you mention Shabbat doesn't mean you took on Shabbat. The reason why you mentioned it is because you want to bless, for the mitzvah that you're doing. That's the only reason. What does that have to do with taking on Shabbat? Really, there's no connection. So my humble opinion, our custom is the more correct one, but everyone has their own custom. That's the way it is, So let's read the Ramah. So he says the custom by them, by the Ashkenazim, is the woman who lit the candle, right? It does take on Shabbat. Unless she conditioned, right, as we said. So it says, even if you can do it, if you in your thought is enough. In other words, you don't have to actually say that. You can just think it, So you see from here, by the way, this Ramah, an important concept, which is that, when it comes to these kinds of conditions and the similar, you don't really have to actually say the condition. You can just think the condition. That's also good enough. which is an important thing, to know, because sometimes people think, oh, I have to actually say it, No, not really. You don't have to say these things. Just thinking it is enough. I'll give you an example, right? When it comes to fast days, so the rule is like this, if you go to sleep the night before the fast day, and let's say you want to wake up in the middle of the night and eat and drink whatever, right? Whatever it is. You want to drink a coffee, whatever. So you can do that, but you have to make a condition, before you go to sleep. What's the condition? That if I wake up, I'm going to eat and drink, as I wish. So here also, right, the rule is you don't have to actually say it. Just thinking it is enough. So you just think it, that's good enough. You don't have to actually say it. Just like here, same thing. Okay, whatever. So that's the custom of the Ashkenazim, right? To do like this. In other words, in general, they take it on unless, right, they made a condition. Even right, just in thought. Okay, that's good. So then he moves on, the Rama, but he says, nevertheless, right, the other family members don't go into Shabbat with the woman, just she goes because she's the one who lit, So therefore, the practical difference is if she, lit the candle, right, and took on Shabbat, she can't do labor, but she can tell her family members to do it for her. Her husband, her son, right, whatever it is, they can do. Because they're still not in Shabbat. They don't go in with her. Even according to the Ashkenazi custom. Okay. So then says the Rama another thing, which is so it says the main lighting of the candles, right, is the one that you put on the table, right? But it says not the other candles in the house. So he says that's when you take on Shabbat, right? When you do the main candle, which is on, your Shabbat table, right? So that's what we're talking about. Your dining room table, whatever it is. Not the other rooms. Another thing he mentions here, the Rama, is the tzarich le'aniach hanerot b'makom shemadlikin. When you are lighting Shabbat candles, right? You have to place it in the right where you're going to light. So what does that mean? Don't light it and then move it to a different place, right? You're not allowed to do that. You should light it where it's going to stay. So why is that? Because when you do it, when you move it around after you lit it, there's going to be several issues that come up with this. Like muksa. You're moving muksa. You're moving the. And you're not really supposed to do that, according to their custom, right? Which you took on Shabbat already. Also, there's other issues. It looks like you didn't really light it for Shabbat when you're moving it around like that. People don't really know you did it for Shabbat. So that's the thing. Same thing with the Hanukkah candles. They say, right, first put it in its place and then light the Hanukkah candles, right? And don't light it and then move it around. Same thing also here.
So what if you find it for one reason or another, you need that table space? Like, I don't know, more people showed up and you got to set another table setting or something like, something like that. Is there a way to move it?
Or you're talking about before Shabbat or during Shabbat?
Well, okay, let's say either, but yeah,
Yeah. So, right. So, right, it would depend on several factors, right? You know, for instance, I'll tell you like this. If you're just moving it around and it's on the table, right? So apparently that's not such a big deal because, it's still there in the same place. I mean, I'm just telling you, like, logically speaking, okay? Like, we have to look it up, but, logically speaking, it really shouldn't be a problem. You have to move it a couple of inches here and there. That's according to the Sephardi custom, right? But according to Ashkenazi custom, they took on Shabbat, so then it's already muktzah for them. So that means they would have to tell, somebody else to do it who's not in Shabbat yet. So it's a whole thing there, you know. So let me see what he says in Mishnah Berurah here. Just interested. Let's see. So he says Mishnah Berurah, right? The reason is because the main candle, right, is the one that you eat there with that candle, where you eat. So the dining room Shabbat table, that's what we're talking about. That candle is the main one. That's one thing. Now, another thing. So it says in Mishnah Berurah something interesting, right? According to the Ashkenazi custom, as we said, right, takes on Shabbat. So even if he would condition not to take on Shabbat, as we said, right, he can do that. So he says, nevertheless, right, you shouldn't move it around. As we said, right, because of the problem of that doesn't look so apparent that you did it for Shabbat. Um, right. So the way the Mishnah Berurah explains it here, it seems like I was right. He says, right, that we're talking about where you're moving it from one place to another. What does that mean? A place where you don't use it to a place where you do use it. He says that's the problem. So therefore, just to move it a couple of inches on the table, it really shouldn't be a problem, according to this. So it says in the Mishnah Berurah, if you did that, if you lit it in a place where you're not using it, and then you move to a place where you are using it, so he says what you have to do is put it out and light it again, and make a blessing because what you did before was not really the mitzvah. But he says if you lit it in a place where where you do use it, you can move it around. He says so that we were right, what we said. Okay, interesting. There's a lot of interesting stuff here. So he brings another thing here, which is interesting, right? That we're coming up to Sukkot now, right? So he says, if the women, right, are lighting the candles in the sukkah, and then they're moving it to the house, right? It's not proper to do this, he says. For the same reason that we mentioned, right? Because you're moving around from one place to another. Okay, whatever. It's interesting. A lot of interesting stuff here. But it seems like definitely just to move it around, on the table, there's no problem with that. That's before Shabbat, right? But during Shabbat, you can't do that. If it's lit, right, you can't do that, obviously. Even after it goes out, right? We already said you have to do something special to have heter for that. Otherwise, you can't do that either. So there you go. Okay, great. So this is a very important halacha. Let's go to Yud Aleph. So then, right, we're going to the issue, as we said, right, that you pray Arvit, you already took on Shabbat. נראה לי שהוא להשמינן שאף על פי שלא התפללו הקהל עדיין וקדם היחיד מתפלל. So it says, it probably means like this, right, to say that even if the rest of the community did not pray yet, just you, as an individual, you prayed, you took on Shabbat because, Arvit you made it night by praying Arvit. The Asur, so you can't do labor, right? That's it. מיהו, אם אינו רוצה לקבל שבת עדיין נראה לכאורה, דהיינו פלוגתא דרבי מאיר והרף גבי הדלקת הנר, ויותר נראה לומר דכיוון שהזכיר קדושת היום, תפילה או אי אפשר לעשותו חול כדברי הכל. So what is he saying here? I'll read it one more time. It says, let's say he doesn't want to take on Shabbat. So then it says it would be a machloket between, Rabbi Meir and the Raf, whatever. But he says then, he concludes not like that. He says, really, the preferred way to explain it is like this. That once he, took on, right, he mentioned Shabbat in the tefillah and the prayer, you can't go back, right? There's no way to go back there. So in other words, it's clear cut, that once you do Arvit, you're in Shabbat. That's it. Nothing to talk about there. That's his conclusion. Yeah, okay, sounds good. Sounds good to me. So says Shulchan Aruch here, even though the community didn't pray yet, right? But let's say the individual, right, went and prayed. Shil Shabbat, he prayed Shabbat, right, before Shabbat started. So he does take on Shabbat by that. Therefore, it's going to be forbidden with labor, right? So as we said, if he has this problem, he's going to have to tell somebody else, to do his labor, right? His daughter, his son, right? Whatever, right? You got to find somebody. You got to find some, likely victim, right? To tell him to do your dirty work, right? Whatever. So that's the way it goes. Your husband. The husband is the best victim, no better victim like the husband. Okay, so that's the story there. But he may be already in shul, maybe it's too late, but you can't catch him anymore, right? Too late. So anyway, that's that. So let's see Shulchan Aruch. Yeah, we already read it pretty much. I think there's one more line here. Right. So he says, even if he says he doesn't want to take on Shabbat, he's trying to stipulate. It doesn't work here. You see, that's the thing. So what does that mean? When it comes to lighting candles, the stipulation does work, right? According to the Ashkenazi custom. For us, we don't need this stipulation. But when it comes to prayers, Arvit, stipulation will not work. Because you're praying Shabbat, So how can you say, right? You didn't take on Shabbat? Ridiculous. It's like you're contradicting yourself. That's the story there. Okay, let's go to your bed. We got time. We got time. So says Bet Yosef here. Katub ben Mordechai, right? It says the Mordechai. So pek Mamed Madlikin. Which is in Shabbat. Oh, so this is what I was meant talking to you about before, right? A few minutes ago. When you get dragged in with the community, right? This is a very interesting halacha. So what happened, right? Let's say most of the community, right, that you live in, they took on Shabbat already, right? They went in early. They do this in the summer very often, right? They take on Shabbat early. One of the things I liked, by the way, by my rabbi, Danielov, Shalom, he never took on Shabbat early, so I always was able to go at the right time. I love that. That was like a good thing for me. I didn't want to take it on early. But here, in Queens, where I live here in Rego Park, like 99% of the shuls, take it on early, especially in the summer, right? I'm talking about. So, but then, I found one shul, on 108, right? Ashkenazi shul, right? Queens Jewish Center. I finally found they don't take it on early, they take it on time. The only problem is it's a 20-minute walk, so I'm too lazy to go there. I'm losing 45 minutes, walking back and forth, so it's like, I don't want this, this is ridiculous. I went there a few times, and then I said to myself, why am I trying so hard? I don't understand why I'm doing this. So anyway, right, but it's nice, it's nice to have the option, to come in on time. But the truth is, in the States, like on time is quite late. Like you don't get home until like 9:30. So you're not done with the Seudah until like 11, which is pretty late. It's quite late. So, it can be, I can understand why they go in early. But in Israel, it's not so late like that, because the horizon is different there. So it doesn't really, it's not really so extreme. It's like 35-minute difference, between there and here in the heat of the summer, the peak of the summer. Okay, whatever. I'm getting off topic over here, but it's really on topic anyway. But anyway, right? It says over here that if the majority of the community went into Shabbat, right? So the question is, do you get dragged in, with them as a minority, right? So it says, so it says, yes, you do get dragged in. If the majority went in the community, you do get dragged in. Therefore, they're not allowed to do labor. By the way, one time, one of the rabbis here asked me this question. he says, can you look this up, take a look at it. He says, I'm afraid, that we have a problem with this. So I found actually that there wasn't really a big problem, and I'll tell you why. We'll explain. That says over here, this is what the Rivam says also. If the community already said Baruch Hu, right? Erev Shabbat. Even the individual, right, who wasn't in shul cannot do labor anymore. He gets dragged in. Even though he doesn't want to take on Shabbat, this guy. He gets dragged in against his will. So here's the thing, right? The way we're saved from this is that in those days, the way it was, like a town usually had like one shul, basically, more or less, that's the way it was. There was one central synagogue. And this is the reason why you get dragged in, because once that shul took on, the Shabbat, that's like the whole town, basically, more or less, right? It's the majority of the town. But when you have separate communities, each one with his own shul, and one community, right, is like a late bloomer, as they say, right? So then that community does save you because, it's an individual community which does not take on Shabbat early. So therefore, that does save you. That's the way we get saved from this today. But you live like in a small town, let's say, right, or like a small Jewish community where there's only one shul. So there you do get dragged in. If the shul takes it on early, you do get dragged in. That's the thing. Only one minyan. There are many places like this in America. Only one shul. That's it. Some young Israel, right, or whatever, right? One of those shuls, That's it. That's all they got. So everybody gets dragged in. Okay, let's see Shulchan Aruch, right? So what does that mean? It means to say that the individual cannot withstand the power of the community. He gets dragged in. Unless he has his own community, right, to save him. That's something else. That's what we said. Okay, Shulchan Aruch, here we go. Says Shulchan Aruch, as we said, right, if the majority of the community accepted Shabbat, right, the minority gets dragged in with them, as we said, right? So here it doesn't mention, right, this exception that I told you. It doesn't mention it here in the Shulchan Aruch. So it must be, this is found in the, in the later books, right? I probably saw it in the Yalkut Yosef or whatever, the Chazon Ovadia. I probably saw it over there somewhere. That when you have a separate community, you don't get dragged in. So let's see if the Mishnah Berurah, right, noticed this, right? What I just told you. Let's see if he caught on to it. Interested to see here. Yeah, he mentions it exactly. Oh, there you go. It's in the Mishnah Berurah. So he says like this, right? If there is a town which has, several shuls, so they don't get dragged in. The other shul doesn't get dragged in because they have a different schedule, even though they are minority. But it's a separate community. That's the thing, But he does say like this. Look what he says, right? He says, if you're making a minyan in your house, so he says, it doesn't save you, only in the shul. Can you imagine? Wow. That's very interesting. I don't know where he got this right, the differentiation from. I'm sure he's got a source for it. Yeah, it doesn't come from the sky. Okay, so we'll stop there, Brother Hashem. That's very interesting and important, this halacha. Because otherwise, you just get dragged in, you get sucked in, to the early Shabbat. You got a problem there. Okay. So anyway, thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. Chazak Baruch Leila Tov. Shabbat Shalom. We'll see you, B'ezras Hashem, on Sunday. God willing, and next week sometime. All the best.
Thank you, Rabbi. Shabbat Shalom.
Bye.